Jay, do you realize that we are meeting on the eclipse, which is supposedly this eclipse is like all about relationships, and it's
Yes,
like this is like there's nothing that's a coincidence in my world.
agreed. That's incredible. Wow. I'm a little surprised and in the best ways, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like I said earlier, you and I have been plotting to do a podcast together for a long
Yes.
time, and
Yes.
it's finally happening. And so it's like, yes, this is
Yes.
the moment to talk about financial safety in
Absolutely.
dating and relationships.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'd love to know sort of what you've explored, like as a relationship coach, as a anti-oppressive relationship coach. I want to hear from you, like what you've been encountering in some of the people that you've been mentoring. Um, yeah, just what types of things come up for people with regard to money in their relationships.
Thank you. That's a fantastic question. And I wanted to share the first thought that comes up for me is how glad I am that we are having these conversations openly because I feel that and find that in a very patriarchal world, that women, non-men, non-binary folks, gender marginalized folks are highly discouraged from financial transparency and money conversations in themselves are kind of held taboo in a relationships and dating context. As we had briefly talked once, that like with my daters, for example, there can sometimes be a concern of coming across as too forward or being perceived as a gold digger, and all of these concerns that make it very difficult for us to lean into money conversations. That's one thing I'm noticing in my clients and my communities, is folks being unsure of whether I should have money conversations early. If I do have them early, what exactly should I be talking about, and on which date, and at which point in the dating process. And with my folks who are married or partnered, um, I come across a lot of financial inequities in marriage, and you know partners, oftentimes men who are financially unsupportive and have an orientation to money and women's access to money that is hyper vigilant and mistrustful of,
Yeah.
and that's a very big theme that I come across.
So you're saying that, if I go on a date with someone and I start talking to them about money, they're going to be turned off because, or like the typical scenario is that they're going to be turned off, or I'm afraid they're going to be
I'm
turned
afraid,
off,
yeah, that's the fear.
right? I'm afraid they're going to be turned off because they're going to think I'm all about the money. I'm like one
Those
of
people.
those women, right?
Right.
Non-binary folks, gender
Right.
fluid folks. Yeah. Um, and so like when do you recommend to people they bring it up at a certain point, or
Mhm.
like what do you recommend in those cases?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the first things I recommend to folks is this very cheeky concept that my clients and community are familiar with that I call it ethical gold digging, is which is I am really trying to de-shame this idea of women wanting equitable access to financial resources, rest, pleasure, leisure,
Yes.
connections, friendship, and community as exploitative in any way. So when I'm talking about this particular concept, like I said, it's a way of playfully de-shaming this very
Yes.
sexist notion. And so
Yes.
one of the first things that we talk about is this idea that, obviously within the parameters of financial safety for everybody involved, that women, non-men, being diligent and financially conscientious is a responsibility to self, to communities, is an
Absolutely.
ancestral gifting that we have, because women have historically been very active um, in knowledge production, in creative production, in all kinds of intellectual, financial contributions to society and the running of the household. So we've
Yes.
never actually been bad at money, or we've
Correct.
or that women holding money conversations hold at being stigmatized is very much a function of patriarchal capitalism. So that's where we start. Like when I'm engaging clients in community, like we get to the origins of where our shame around money conversation is really coming from, so we can make more liberatory, nourishing choices. So I think the process begins with de-shaming and developing and leaning into more of that liberatory lens that celebrates our financial transparency and proactiveness and having these conversations early. So
Yes.
to answer you more specifically, I say bring a financial conscientiousness within the first 2 to 3 dates. And we can start with sharing, for example, some of our own short-term financial goals. And briefly, concisely, we don't have to disclose anything we're uncomfortable disclosing or disclose numbers and so forth. But to begin that conversation around, what our goals are and not simply our goals, but also our perspectives on leisure spending, on debt, on how we contribute to family and communities. And as we are holding this conversation and sharing some of our ideals and beliefs, it's also important to check in with the other person and invite if they'd be comfortable sharing. For example, if you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to know some of your professional and financial goals as well. So
Mm-hmm.
inviting them into the conversation and then observing not simply what they're saying, but also nonverbal cues.
Yes.
How comfortable are they with this conversation? Is there any
Right.
hint of disapproval? Are they getting very tense? Are they blocked from expressing themselves? And what I mean by that is that are they trying to change the subject? So we are attuning to
Right.
how their body is responding as they
Absolutely.
respond.
And I just want to back up for a moment. I mean, there's so much to get into here, but I want
Of
to
course.
back up for a moment because I really want to explain what financial safety in relationship means. Like, let's
Mhm.
pause for a moment and just talk about that because you just you just alluded to someone's comfort and relationship with talking about finances, right? Which is like taps into generational, right?
Absolutely.
It's rooted in familial beliefs
Absolutely.
and relationship with money, right? All of that stuff. And then, when you also bring in the inequity between, let's say, the traditional gender roles, right? Like men and women, and the inequities in relationships from the perspective of finances, who holds financial power in the relationship
Right.
and how that's been misused, right? There's been
Absolutely.
financial abuse in relationships, certainly. And what hasn't been talked about enough is that there are women who are financially abused
Ab-
in relationships. And in the divorce process for women is pretty devastating in
Absolutely.
ways that maybe are not for men.
Mhm.
So I'm just like, yeah, let's get into all of it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm completely here for that. So one of the things that I've been talking about in relation to financial safety is a lot of us, I feel that a lot of us know what the quote unquote financial red flags are. As
Yes.
in the deficit is not cognitive, it is not psychoeducational or informational. I think a lot of us, we know that, oh, this is a red flag, or, this may be an example of financially controlling behavior. But I think what gets in the way of us making those financially safe decisions, and when we do sense those red flags, making the pivot right when we see them, as opposed to continuing to seek more proof, more confirmation, and perhaps understandably leaning into what I would consider a fantasy of perhaps this will change in future.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Yes.
The
Whenever we
betting
see
on
something that's kind of
potentials.
right, and really trusting our intuition, like when we see a little sample of something to
Absolutely.
sort of pull on that thread instead of
Yes.
just like ignoring and saying like, oh yeah, I didn't see that.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I've been talking about in relation to emotional safety, which also applies to financial safety, is is knowing some of our own attachment vulnerabilities, which is to say, like what are some of these hooks that can cause me to overlook signs of warning and signs of trouble? So for oh, is it sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah,
interrupt.
no, no, go
Okay.
ahead. Yeah.
So I was, for example, I was saying that one of the things that has made me overlook financially troublesome behavior has been um, privileging the other person's past traumas or marginalization and thinking perhaps this person did X, Y, Z because of their experiences and perhaps they meant well otherwise. And if we just talk about this further, that may resolve it. And then we don't always talk about it because then the patriarchal shaming around talking about money comes in. So it gets kind of left on the back burner. And now over time, you're getting more attached, more connected without that financial piece being revisited. So it's
Yes.
like, what are our vulnerabilities? Like, so for me, that vulnerability is my rooted in codependency and rescuing, fixing tendencies. So what
Mhm.
exactly is making us overlook that red flag or that sign of warning that we're seeing, um, and receiving more support with healing that at the root, at the core?
So you're saying, for an example, as an example, like one makes excuses for the partner, like, well,
Absolutely.
it's because they have this or that trauma, that they're like
Absolutely.
this, and of course, poor thing, kind of like that.
Maybe it's a one-time thing. We
It's a,
divorce and
yeah,
disconnect it from the pattern.
got it, got it, got it. We're not stepping
We're
back and
not
seeing the full
absolutely,
picture.
absolutely
Yes, that's true. Like we see it as an
making an
isolated
exception.
incident. Exactly, exactly. And yeah, and when I think back on, my past relationship, of course this was like decades and decades ago at this point, but you know, my first date was like involved me lending my ex-partner money. And for me, I did it from such a place of like, I have it to give, and of course, but I didn't, and because money was not important to me at the time, it's different now. The relationship I have with money, of course, is different now. But at the time, it was kind of like whatever, right? It was whatever. But I didn't
Mhm.
see there were signs of things that I should be concerned about. And along the way, there were signs. But because of my relationship with money, I didn't give it importance because I wasn't giving money importance,
Mhm.
right? So our relationship with money and then our attachment patterns,
Absolutely,
our partner's relationship with money, all of those come together to form this dynamic, right?
absolutely,
That often blows up relationships because so a huge like fracturing, um money can be like a huge fracture in
absolutely.
relationships, right? It can be like part of the catalyst that
The
you know,
unraveling
the
point, I
unraveling.
sometimes call it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. And those patterns run into all of different places.
absolutely,
It's not just money.
absolutely.
Um, but yeah, like with the early conversations, I really love what you're saying about the ethical gold digging and the
Mhm.
de-shaming of having these conversations early on,
Mhm.
because even in the show Married at First Sight.
Right.
Did you see that conversation between one of the couples where they were, um, he had debt and he didn't own a credit card and she was concerned, and that was the reason why they ended up not moving further along.
Mhm.
That was kind of a turnoff for her. That was a deal breaker. And she
Absolutely, as it
was,
should be.
yeah, and there were, there were people who were like, but it's love, why are you making money so
Love
important?
conquers all. No, it
Right,
doesn't.
exactly. So
Right.
I think that women have been fed that narrative of like
Absolutely.
love is more important than money. And
Hmm.
it's like, I can see how that's a yes for me. And right, there's some real basic practicalities,
Absolutely.
right? And like management and stewardship and right, that just is about structure,
Hmm.
right? Can you
Absolutely.
say something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. As you were speaking, I just thought it was so powerful what you said about like love being more important than money. And it's like on the surface, who would disagree with that?
Right.
And what I'm saying at the same time is this beautiful lesson that I had learned through your mentorship was that the energy of money is very similar to the energy of love and intimacy. And so one of the things that I talk about in relation to this is like the relationship a person has with love is just as important as a relationship a person has with money.
Hmm.
And how that relationship with love manifests in actions towards us is just as important as how a person's relationship with money results in actions towards us. And of course, the relationship itself
Yes.
and how they steward the relationship in terms of emotional fulfillment, emotional care, emotional conscientiousness and supportiveness, and financial fulfillment, financial care, financial stability, and conscientiousness. So those two things need to be seen as going in tandem because how we are treated in love, how fairly we are treated in love can never be divorced from can never be divorced from money because money has the same energy of equitable provision and care that love should.
Bravo. Yes, exactly it. Equitable provision and care.
Yes,
Yes. And that involves like reciprocity, giving,
absolutely.
receiving, right?
Absolutely.
All of those interchanges.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the questions that I have in my notes is like, how can
Yes.
women protect their assets in, protect themselves financially, um, just by like, from those upfront conversations?
Hmm.
What kind of questions can we ask? What are we looking for when we are dating, when we are in relationship? What are we what are red flags, for example? What are green flags?
Absolutely. So I've actually written a few things down here, but I wanted to name a couple of red flags that I had made a note of that are sometimes quite normalized socially. So
Okay.
yeah. So one of the things I noted was when men, for example, it does not have to be men, but in this case, I'm using men's example because of these patriarchal dynamics that impact relationships. It's like if somebody is earning several times as much as women non-men partners and still demanding contributions to rent other expenses that will leave them with very little savings and financial freedom. So as we had briefly discussed, that sometimes folks can propose this kind of numerically equal split. For
Yes.
example, somebody's making, let's say, 20K per month, and the partner is making 5K per month, and they'll say, yeah, let's both pay 20% of our incomes towards rent without taking into account that their 20% leaves them with $16,000 that they're able to save and invest, whereas this person who's making only 5K when 1,000 leaves their account, they're only left with $4,000, with which they're
Right,
paying
right.
student loans, other expenses. And if the person is a woman of color, they may have additional complexities such as probably supporting folks back home. So the money is not going the same length to support both people depending on the income differential.
Yes.
So it's very important to look at, is this person does this person have a view of financial equality that is completely asystemic and ahistorical?
Hmm. That's a great question. Yes. Are they taking into account the fact that, women only earn a percentage
Exactly.
of a man's dollar, and if you are
Absolutely.
a Black woman, a Latina
Latina,
woman,
yeah.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's even less so.
Yes. So, which is why, like, one of the things I talk about is do not be afraid of the follow-up question.
Yeah,
And if you're saying, and it's also important in dating, for example, to avoid the yes or no questions. Like, do you believe in financial equality for women? Like most men will,
of
of
course.
course,
Yes.
they'll say yes.
Yeah.
So what we're asking for is in what ways, how? Would you talk more about that? I would love to know your thoughts. Would you like to expand on that further? Ask for more
Mhm.
detail, ask for more information, get a fact check on their value system. Don't simply
Yes.
take it at face value and just go with
Yeah.
what a person is professing.
Yes.
So that's one thing. Is it okay for me to share two more red flags?
Please. Yes.
Perfect. So the other thing I noticed was, and I frequently notice, is when men, and it's not always moneyed folks, but sometimes I've noticed that it may be more likely to come up when someone is moneyed, that they don't really take our wishes, desires, or preferences into account when offering gifts. So to me, this is a red flag.
Hmm.
When someone just gives you, let's say, a gift that is, expensive, or a gift that they believe you need or you would like, and there's like no real checking in with what's important to you, what you enjoy, what gives you joy and
Right.
pleasure, and what makes you feel connected. So that
Mhm.
is a thing where, as you beautifully said, when I tug at that thread, like what I typically find underneath that is this idea that you should be grateful for what you're given.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm having some flashbacks right now.
Right. Right. And this may come from their own family system, because a lot of
Yeah.
us had parents who had that kind of approach, that here's a gift. Be glad that I've given you something at all. And I understand where that comes from, but that's I would consider that a financial red flag.
Right. And it's like scarcity based too.
Scarcity based.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the other thing I noted, I think this is very important for entrepreneurial women on men, is men who have this kind of financial savioristic, non-consensual mentorship type of approach, where they start to meddle in our businesses and start to give us advice on how we can run a more profitable business, and like, why don't you try this and why don't you make that change. And
Yes.
in my experience, that has typically been one of the portals to upcoming financial control.
Ooh. Oh, okay. Almost like a little bit
A
mansplaininess.
mansplaining approach that also gets into financial splaininess, and I know this better than you, why don't you try my way. And a lot of
Hmm.
the times it starts there, and unless we're careful in spotting it and cutting it off, and ideally perhaps pivoting in a different direction, but in
Hmm.
my experience it has typically tended to then become more controlling over time.
Oh,
So we may
wow.
perceive that as, oh, he's so invested in my business. He really, really cares. But
Yeah.
someone who cares and is invested in us and also respects our boundaries and well-being and our acumen is not going to act as though their expertise overrides ours.
Yes. Yeah. And what do you do in situations where, the spending habits are different,
Yes.
right? For example, one partner may not consult the other about making a specific purchase, or, one has a looser a looser wallet than the other,
Mm.
you
Right.
know? What do
Right.
you what do you suggest in situations like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, when I think of that discrepancy in financial, like, spending habits, I like to ask folks about financial safety and wellness non-negotiables. Like, how large are these, how costly are these mistakes? Pardon me, not mistakes. Oh, that was not meant to be a Freudian slip. How costly are these purchases is what I was trying to say. Like, what is the actual financial cost of such spending, either in one-off large purchases, or an ongoing pattern of purchases that add up in a way that are causing financial detriment to the relationship.
Hmm.
So if it's someone who simply likes to spend more, but they're spending in proportion to their income, and that spending is not putting you themselves and the financial stability and wellness of the relationship at risk, I think that can be a solvable problem and ongoing conversation. But if
Okay.
those spending habits are financially detrimental to the person, to you and the relationship, that to me is a mission aboard.
Right.
That's a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, because ideally, when when people come together and form a
Yes.
relationship, you have these long-term goals that you want to achieve. You have like a
Absolutely.
vision that you're working towards together, right? And it may not be a
Absolutely.
specific financial vision, but it's like, oh, wouldn't we love to live in this place or
Absolutely.
have our kids go to school here or, whatever the
Right.
conversation or, you know,
Yes.
or maybe it's about minimalism. Like it could
Hmm.
be about not spending.
Absolutely.
And, to have then one person sort of like,
That's a breach of trust, actually.
exactly, exactly.
Yes. Yes.
To have one person
Absolutely.
sort of exit that plan or stray from that plan, it feels like
Absolutely.
almost like cheating on the vision.
That's beautifully said. And which is why when I was thinking of, like, is it, financially detrimental to the relationship? You said it beautifully. I think what you and I are getting at is that it is a breach of contract, that relationship
Yes.
contract that we have, joined when we entered into the partnership, the
Yeah.
relationship, as you beautifully said. I think through your wisdom, one of the things I want to bring to my clients and communities and friends is this idea of the financial vision needs to be a huge part of your shared relationship vision,
Hmm.
and that it needs to be treated as any other vital, valuable relationship agreement,
Yeah.
that breaching which is considered this, it's time where you just put everything on hold. And really, by everything on hold, I mean you cut out distractions and you really sit with what has happened and the
Yeah.
implications and consequences of that, and commit
Exactly.
to reality.
Yeah. Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I could tell so many stories about red flags and things that I've gone through over
Absolutely.
the last, whatever, 30 years at this point, well, 25 years. Um, and it's really so important that women, go into a relationship really being financially literate.
Yes.
Because I think that though a lot of the ways that, you had said it earlier about like, well, women are really good with money. We just don't believe that we are.
Yes.
We've believed, we've drunken the Kool-Aid that we're not good
Absolutely.
with money, and so we defer,
Yes.
stewardship to our partners, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so this is something that's more, just been sort of my thing over the last year and a half is really the importance of financial literacy and
Yes.
understanding
Absolutely.
how money works, right? Even if we don't
Exactly.
like how the system of money works, we understand how it
How it works.
functions at the very
Yes.
least, so that, if we bring something to our partners and say, look, you spent this money and that's taking away from here and here and here, like that we
Hmm.
have an overview of our investments or where our money is parked, and then, we're not as easily swayed or pushed around if our partner sort of gives us a rebuttal and says, well, I didn't do this. Well, we can say, yes, actually, because I checked this account. And
Absolutely.
when you took money from there, it's actually money that's supposed to be going in, into this vehicle or into
Exactly.
401k or wherever it happens to be,
Yes.
right? To have an overview so that you can track, but to also
Exactly.
have the literacy to understand how it impacts the long-term financial goal,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. So I think, like what you beautifully said, it reminds me a little bit of the Gottmans and their trust metrics
Yes.
and
Say
how
more
that
about
can be
that.
applied. Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that I am absolutely certain that you've come across as well, professionally and personally, is a lot of us um, speak to having trust issues.
Yeah.
And this idea of I'm not exactly sure whom to trust. I mean, love is trust. So this is inevitably going to come up in relationships. So one of the ways that I support my clients with it in terms of not healing the trust wounding is, um, there's the somatic body-based approach, but then there's also the psychoeducational, the literacy aspect, where I share with them that these Gottman trust metrics include reliability. I hope I do not forget the metrics when I need to remember them most. Reliability, and they have to do with ethics. They have to do by reliability. It's person who follows through on their actions, who does not maximize their own interests at
Yeah.
cost to our needs and well-being. There's ethics, like what values do they hold? There's alliance, that this person does not form alliances against us. They're actually allied with our best interests. And
Yes.
then the final one is accountability. How accountable is this person? Do they take responsibilities for their actions and make improvements and actual on the ground changes as needed
Yeah.
based on feedback that they're receiving. And a very similar set of metrics can be applied to financial trust as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Can you,
so,
so the person has to be reliable then in
absolutely.
just following through with,
Yes.
they don't say they're going to go to the store and just buy this thing and then they
Yes.
buy this other thing.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I'm
Yes.
just thinking about a time that
Yes.
my ex-partner opened up an account or used our money to open up an account and then said it was his project. And I just like experienced
Right.
that as such deep betrayal.
Yes. Absolutely.
It felt like my big trigger is to be lied to, and so that felt
Yes.
like a big lie.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, those can create ruptures. And so yes, the
Absolutely.
reliability,
Yes.
you know, do
Yes.
as you say you're gonna do.
Hmm.
And with relationship to money, it's just like, yes, that bill got paid. You said that bill got
And it
paid
got paid. Right.
and it got paid, right?
And financial transparency, I would like to add that.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to quickly add, simply so I don't forget this, like a lot of times with dating, folks are like, what can financial transparency look like? And to me, it's like once you start to see a developing relationship, financial transparency can literally be actually showing each other bank statements,
Yeah.
credit scores, and having these open conversations about income and how much we're making per month.
Hmm.
And don't look at that as, oh my God, I'm doing something wrong, or is that asking too much, or is that harmful? It's actually financially supportive of both parties to know where exactly we are at.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of the questions and the verification.
Yeah.
As long as it's transparent, we're not going behind somebody's back. We're literally
Exactly.
asking them. And if they're not comfortable with sharing any financial information, that's information, that's data for us.
Hmm.
But
Right. I mean,
asking is important.
we ask our partners about their sexual history. We
Exactly.
ask them about diseases when they got tested,
Hmm.
right? Like there used to be so much shame around that too. And
Right.
we've really destigmatized that. And so the intention of this is to also destigmatize those conversations and that level
Absolutely.
of transparency and intimacy
Right.
about money,
Absolutely.
right? Like, what is your
Absolutely.
financial history? Have you declared bankruptcy at some time in your life, right? All
Exactly.
the things.
Exactly. What's with tax, with tax payments. If has a person been paying their taxes on time?
Yes, exactly, exactly. Right. It's so important that people know what they're getting into, right? Like
Absolutely.
you want to know the person you're marrying, their
Absolutely.
personality, you want to know their family, you want to know their financial history, you want to know their
Abs
relationship history, right?
yes.
It's part of the
Yes.
bigger,
It's part of that.
yeah.
And let's normalize, as you said, let's destigmatize these conversations and make them par for the course.
Hmm. Right, exactly, exactly. Yeah, and are there considerations for women? And I speak specifically about women because we do make less money, right? Um, like compared to like the dollar, right?
Mhm.
Um, but what are what are some considerations for women regarding financial safety? Like some major considerations. Like for example, like, I feel like it's a hard place to be if you are like if you really love this person
Mhm.
and they're just not in a good place financially. Like, what do you do in a situation like that? I know that there are a lot of people that are in situations like that where their partner isn't irresponsible with money.
Right.
There may not be like any red flags except that they're just not established in their career, for
Mhm.
example, or they're in between jobs,
Mhm.
right? There are circumstances that are kind of like gray areas.
Right, I agree. I agree. I think that's so incredibly important to talk about, and that
Yeah,
connects with a few notes I had made here. If
yeah,
it's okay for me to get into this
please.
a little deeper, I had noted three things here. One was when we were looking at the situations where there's gray areas, and in general also, but specifically to what you were speaking about, when a person is otherwise trustworthy, but they have fallen on hard times, or they're in between jobs, or maybe
Yeah,
they're in a career transition. I
yes,
think one of the things that is coming up to me top of the mind is actually not financial. It's more emotional, which is to say, what is this person's response to this hardship in relation to how they show up in relationship with me.
yes. Okay.
So if they're in this financially challenging situation that's temporary or transitioning, do they feel entitled to extracting emotional and financial care from me, which is beyond what is financially safe for me to give?
Right. Okay. Okay.
So that's one thing that comes up. Are they still emotionally conscientious? Are they still emotionally safe? Or is
Yes.
that financial challenge revealing some rupture, revealing or amplifying some other fracture in that system,
Yes. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
where this particular impediment or this particular obstacle is bringing out behaviors in this person that are
Yeah.
emotionally not safe and not nourishing and not good for me? So
Yes.
that's one thing I'm looking at. Um, the other thing I'm looking at is, what exactly is the situation? And is this like a systemic impediment? Has this situation resulted from some poor choices they may have made? And if so, how bad were those choices? Like, was this like an actually like was this due to, for example, and I'm not pardon me, I'm not stigmatizing it on the whole, because sometimes, we come from very challenging backgrounds, but was this, due to criminal activity? Like, what exactly has gone wrong? So I would like a little more information on what was really happening and their level of transparency around the actual challenge.
Okay.
So to me,
Okay.
that would be important. Like, is there a lot of this shroud of secrecy around what has resulted in the financial challenge, or are they? And I'm not saying folks should reveal these very raw, vulnerable, deeply painful details, but at the very least, we need to know enough to determine the integrity of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So what's their level of pardon me, transparency around that? I would then check in with, what is this person's recovery plan? Like,
Yeah.
do they have some kind of planning in place? Are they seeking the right support to emerge from this? Are they looking for new jobs? Like, what exactly is the plan moving forward that they are proactively implementing?
I think that those are all really good. It really those are really good considerations, and it's an invitation to sort of look at the issue a little bit more deeply and in a more
Absolutely.
nuanced way, right? To take into
Absolutely.
account like, marginalization factors,
Mhm.
situational factors. And I think another piece that's really important to consider is, what is the person's narrative around where they are right now? Do they
Absolutely.
blame other people
Exactly.
for where they are, or do
How
they take
accountable?
responsibility for, if they made a misstep, do they take
Abs-
responsibility for that? And are they
Absolutely.
motivated to correct it?
Absolutely.
You
Which
know?
was that? Absolutely. Which is what I was thinking, like, that motivation to correct one would hope show up in an actual financial recovery plan that they're
Yeah.
implementing.
Yeah.
So I loved what you said. And the other things I had written down here was like financial goals. What are their short and long-term financial goals?
Yeah.
Financial ethics. So, which we briefly, not briefly, we have actually touched on this quite a bit. Like, what are this person's financial values in general? We need to
Yeah.
be checking about this in general. Also, I want to check into financial boundaries because I'm going to be honest with you. I find that sometimes there are not just women and men, but men who, like myself, have had poor financial boundaries where their giving to family and community
Y-
has resulted in financial um, harm towards themselves.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
That happens as
Yes.
well.
Right. And sometimes there's a cultural narrative
Cultural narrative, yes.
around that, but that's really it's actually rooted in codependency and
Codependency,
unhealthy.
yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I even mentioned, oh my God, you should see my notes. I wrote financial trustworthiness, and in boundaries, I wrote codependency question mark. So you're absolutely right that there is financial codependency. Like, are we engaging in those rescuing, fixing, caretaking behaviors to the points of financial self-harm?
Exactly. Yes. And that's why circling back to what we said at the beginning, having these conversations are a form of self-care, right?
Absolutely.
Like knowing exactly what you're getting into,
Hmm.
right? Just
Absolutely.
having it all laid out on the table. That is, that does bring, just thinking about doing that with a partner just makes me feel so safe.
Yes.
Like,
It's
hey,
so
there are no
intimate.
secrets here. Yes, it's
Hmm.
intimate, it's open.
Yes.
And maybe we have some feelings about like, yeah, well, I didn't make so much last year, or I did file bankruptcy 10 years
Right.
ago. It's
Absolutely.
cleared now, but yeah, that was a hard time in my
That's a hard
life,
time.
right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
that's vulnerable, and it's can be actually a very connective conversation when,
Absolutely.
right, when there's that openness. The same things that you teach and that I've taught with couples of just like remaining
Right.
open and holding space
Absolutely.
and having like, you know, yeah, just the open-hearted conversation, just
Absolutely. And it
right,
can bring up
heart-centered
grief.
listening, yeah,
Yes.
compassion.
Compassion.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Absolutely. A related point I had mentioned that I just want to name because I think it's especially important for women, non-men, non-binary folks, gender marginalized folks, is learning about like how was money handled in their family of origin, but more specifically also like how do they perceive their mother or their non-man parent, however they may have self-identified, like how do they perceive their experience in marriage, like what is their understanding of financial inequity and
Hmm.
household labor inequity in marriage, like is there a
Yeah,
tendency to glorify like my mom was superwoman, like she did everything, or is there like a nuanced compassionate understand accountable understanding of actually things were inequitable in my household
yeah, yeah,
and I want things to be different
yeah.
in my own life, in my own choices, and that I am in fact open to receiving ongoing feedback and influence from you on how best to emotionally and financially be supportive of you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So important. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because sometimes we can have, ideas of how our family functioned and hold that up as the ideal when in fact it was quite
It was
dysfunctional.
quite dysfunctional.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And to
Absolutely.
just
Like,
get like to just
yes.
be willing to be mirrored in that and be
Yes.
confronted. It's like actually that was really unhealthy, right? Especially if
Hmm.
there was like, oh well, my parents sent money to their parents and I'm
Hmm.
sending money to my parents,
Hmm.
right? It's like, oh, actually, we're not doing that.
Right.
Establishing those relationship
Absolutely.
values through that mirroring process.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this was so wonderful,
Thank
Jay.
you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much
Isha.
for coming on here. And I
Thank you.
want to let listeners know, how can they find you? How can they hire you?
Oh, of course. Thank you so much for that. Because it just really connects with our podcast today. It is so difficult for me to receive money, to receive payment for my services sometimes. So for me, it's music to my ears and very healing to know that I can share some information about how I work. So this is financially healing for me too. So thank you, Isha.
Yeah.
Um, folks, I'm Jay Asooli and my website is jasooli.com. I am on Instagram as asooli.coaching. I can be found on Facebook simply by looking up my name, Jay Asooli, Jay, last name Asooli. I I'm very excited to work with women, non-men, and also men of color who are looking to experience these really delightful, secure, satisfying, and equitable relationships. I work with singles, I work with coupled and married folks, and folks in divorce and breakup recovery. On my website, you'll be able to book a very informative, relaxed chat with me where we can discuss more about how I may be able to support you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Jay. And I hope
Thank
that
you,
people
Shay.
really get so much out of this.
Thank you. I hope so too.